That vine actually looks a lot better on camera than I would ever have imagined. If the camera's twitching a bit, I'm sorry. I'm having a Tourette's moment. It might also make my voice jump up and down. It's like a Kodak moment, except it's all of your body remembering, oh yeah, I'm supposed to freak out now and then. But it's not going to stop me from finally getting the video done. Had a busy day again. Go figure. But we have reached one of the now finally truly lighter um, style genres, which I understand might be a bit mislabeled, but if you give me a moment, I will try to explain why that is. The genre is silly, or the style, if you will, is silly. Um, Not that it's a silly style or genre. The name of the style or genre is actually silly. Silly is the name. Adjectives are sometimes hard to use. But yeah, the genre silly, I've really been racking my brain to try and explain it in a way that doesn't fall into the usual stereotypical boo 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 silly kind of storytelling that is just out there. It's not cartoonish silly. It's not even um, cool toonish silly. Cool tunes are cartoons that are meant for uh, the thinking public, you could say, or at least that try to be more adult without being, you know, adult content. Uh, Cartoons such as Rick and Morty or Futurama. It's not even that kind of silly. That's flat out comedy. No, silly is more of an anti-serious genre, and by that I mean that if you're running a game silly, then there are very few things that are supposed to be taken serious. It's not all goofing around. It's in fact quite often very down to earth, very realistic stuff in theory, but there are no real serious aspects to it. What I realized when I was prepping for this video was that a lot of action adventure movies, both the classics and the more modern ones, are actually silly movies in both the usual use of the word and in the style genre use of the word silly. A series like Pirates of the Caribbean, or Pirates of the Caribbean, however you pronounce it, whoever you are out there, you mysterious person, you, um, is actually a silly set of movies. The things that happen in those movies are almost never meant to be serious in any way, even though they would they should be, and they would be if this was meant as something in any way realistic. Jack Sparrow is a great example of this. The pirate captain who does a lot of completely insane things and always gets away without a scrap on it. He actually, in fact, he actually has a line. I believe it's in the third one at World's End, where someone, I think it is actually the villain of the movie, remarks, "You're quite mad," And Jack Sparrow remarks back, "If I wasn't, this probably wouldn't work." And then he just does something completely silly that would normally have killed him. Um, but that's an easy mark. Jack Sparrow is an easy mark. He's supposed to be a silly character in many ways, even though he has a lot of depth that a lot of people actually overlook because of the silliness. But the rest of the movie is also very silly, um, or the rest of the movies, I should say, because things are so lighthearted that serious concepts like death or injury or even any kind of real consequences are never really on the board unless they are part of the plot. You do not worry that someone might die from an action unless there is a very good story reason for them to die. If it would be dramatic, then sure, someone could die. You have the legendary Jeffrey Rush in the legendary role as Captain Barbosa with a breathtaking death scene for me at least. I think it's breathtaking. Um, in the first movie, where yes, he does die, but it's part of the story. He doesn't just die because he did something careless or because um, he got pushed into a corner or something. It wasn't a remark about the world or anything nasty like that that ended up killing him. It was his place in the story to die at that moment, and his death meant something. If there are any serious consequences to anything in a silly game, then those consequences mean something. Um, but it goes even beyond that, in fact. You have other characters in the movie that would have faced dire consequences, bodily consequences, social consequences in so many ways, but they never do because it's supposed to be just entertaining. We're not supposed to worry about something as silly as consequences. That kills the mood. And that goes back to, in fact, older movies. As I said, the classics are full of these silly movies. I personally grew up with a mother who, from her father, had inherited a great love of Errol Flynn movies, the older or the culturally aware people in out there will. I'm still pretending that I have an audience for this. I don't, but anyone who might know a bit about movies will know who Errol Flynn is. He is the action adventure hero of his day. I think that was back in the 60s. I'm tempted to say perhaps even earlier. I'm not sure. It's a long time since I've seen any of his movies. But those were the original swashbuckling movies in many ways. And their popularity probably boosted the genre to be a major part of cinema history, and probably laid the groundwork for something like the Pirates of the Caribbean series. He actually had pirate movies too, but he's probably best known for his role in the classic Robin Hood movie. Um, he's the guy who walks in with, I think it's a deer on his shoulder at Prince John's banquet and smacks it on the table. If that if you know the scene, that should spark the memory. But if you don't know the scene, then that will tell you nothing. But he pioneered. He might not have pioneered, but he made um, he made the movie trope of insane fights that have very little blood and gore in them, if any, where you swing on chandeliers and jump up on table and trade insults and remarks and all that. He made them popular, if he didn't actually more or less invent the style, for movies at least. And that is silly. No fighting works like that. If you stop in the middle of a fight to try and crack a joke at someone, you're gonna get hurt. If you fight by jumping up on tables or swinging from things, you're gonna lose, you're gonna get hurt, and you're probably going to get killed. And not even by the person you're fighting. You're just gonna get killed by doing something stupid. But silly stories are full of this. They are full of people doing things just because it's cool or it's fun or it makes their character. I'm trying not to say silly again, but yeah, it makes their character amusing. It makes the whole scene amusing. There is a Robin Hood parody. A parody is comedy. Um, I think spoof is the modern word for it. Um, where there is a scene that, although it is comedy, it would also portray something that would fit into to just a silly genre, where um, the sheriff of I think it's Rottingham in that movie um, slaps Robin Hood on the face with a glove and challenges him to a duel, and Robin Hood grabs a glove from a suit of armor, meaning it's made of metal, and slaps the sheriff back, nearly knocking him to the ground, and says, "I accept." And that could just as well be in a standard silly movie, because there is no thought of, okay, that would severely injure him. There is no thought of, there are grave consequences to doing that. Not in something silly. Silly is not dumb. Silly is not insanely exaggerated. Silly is anti serious. You ignore most or all of the serious consequences that the actions of characters or the events in a story would have, and you focus on what makes the story entertaining. And there is one thing about silly that bathos can do it too. And I'm not sure casual could carry it, but bathos can do it too. But it really stands out when you do it with silly. And that is blending in other tones that seem incompatible. And by that I mean any dark tones. You can have dark silly, which is far more. It's silly, but it kind of uses darker tones as a tool to make them silly. It turns them against themselves. My favorite example, which I gave in the original um, video on style genres, is a role playing game, tabletop role playing game called Paranoia, that is on the surface a very dark game. Tells the story of a post apocalypse bunker complex, huge bunker complex. Basically, a small country uh, inside bunkers. If you know the Fallout game, think Fallout vaults, but way bigger. That is controlled by a computer that was created before the war, as far as I remember, but along the way, a lot of people have had a lot of input on it, and it has basically gone crazy. But its purpose is to keep every citizens of this bunker complex called Alpha Complex. Um, the computer's assignment, so to speak, is to keep them happy, which has turned really dark because it has come to the conclusion that people who are not happy are trying to sabotage its efforts and are therefore traitors and must be executed. But this dark concept is made completely silly by being taken completely out of uh, being completely exaggerated to the point of meaninglessness. Happiness is mandatory is one of the major slogans. That and the computer is your friend. And to make sure that everybody is happy, the computer has everybody cloned from birth. Normal birth is non-existent, basically. Um, has them cloned from birth, so they have a clone family, so that if some of them die, then it's not so bad because they still have a lot of other basically identical people left. So any individual clone is completely disposable, and if one clone is a traitor, then it's not going to reflect on others. And everybody is a traitor in one way or another because everybody is a member of some secret society. Everybody has mutations, which is treasonous. And every machine is basically a death trap. Cleaning robots explode or have their brains mixed up with combat robots, ending with some oversized vacuum cleaner Roomba style thing trying to kill people. Everything goes wrong. Everything short circuits. Everybody's crazy. The food is probably poisoned half the time. But it's so taken out of it's pushed so far that hey, shut up. It's pushed so far that it becomes humorous, and the fact that every death is just a reason to replace with one of the clone siblings just makes even death a kind of silly little detail. And silly genres, silly stories can do that. They can take very very dark things and make them silly. You cannot take silly and make it very very dark. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that. It's easier, much much easier to take dark things and make them silly than it is to take silly things and make them dark. I've never seen taking silly things and making them dark being done well, but I have seen the other thing very much. Um, Even something as like grimdark, the darkest style I've described, can be made silly. It's just hordes of people killing themselves. I'm thinking, starting to think of Sepp Brannigan from Futurama, a starship captain whose favorite tactic when fighting anyone is to just throw soldiers at them until they get so tired from killing all his soldiers that they just either if their robots shut down or if they are organics they just give up and go home because they just get so tired from killing all the soldiers. And that's a comedy show. um, in fact, Futurama kind of swings between comedy and standard silly quite a lot. And cosmic horror. I've seen cosmic horror done silly so many times, and it's a personal favorite of mine. With huge, monstrous entities, ancient gods, and so on, terrorizing everybody, and people who are and some people who know about this and are used to this, just being so tired about it and ending up blackmailing elder gods with photos from last Christmas company party or something, and just people who are so fed up with all the drama and horror, and just take it all as a bit of a joke. And when it's done silly, they can get away with it. If it's cosmic horror, these are the people who go insane and die in horrible ways. But when it's done silly, they are the heroes. They are the most powerful, most victorious characters around, because the darkness cannot harm them as long as they keep it silly. And that might be the hidden motto of the silly style, of the silly genre. Dark things cannot harm you as long as you keep it silly. It doesn't have to be dark, but it can be. It can also just be silly all on its own. It can make fun of annoying bureaucracy. It can be make fun of social norms and tendencies. It can just be anything normal but silly. You can have a perfectly normal fantasy story where instead of people getting their souls burned out of them, or their flesh smashed and torn apart by bad magic, they just get thrown around the place and basically get up with just a few bruises and a lot of complaint and a few quips. Silly is what characters in bathos wish everything was, that they could just survive everything by being quippy and brushing things off. You can do that in silly. Some dark things are still real. Characters can still die. Things can still go horribly wrong. But the majority of things are meant to just be amusing, and consequences be damned. You cannot focus on harsh consequences in a silly story. And that is the point of it. It is basically a fantasy of being in a world where things are just fun and harmless as long as you don't take them too seriously. Silly is the anti serious genre.